start. I'm just going to give it a sec. Welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about getting started with generative AI and saying it's not as difficult as you might think. I've got leaders from NetDocuments and Lewis Silkin today, and we're going to be talking about their insights and best practices on determining pain points ripe for automation, selecting tools, building out solutions to see ROI on your investment. Lewis Silkin will be talking about the success they've had using NetDocuments Gen AI solution PatternBuilder Max. So if you've been curious as to how to achieve ROI on client-facing work, you're in the right webinar. I'm joined by a great panel today. So I've got Scott Kelly, who is product lead for AI and automation at NetDocuments. Hi, Scott.
Hi there. Really excited to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So Scott is one of the co-founders of Afterpattern, which NetDocs acquired in 2021, and it forms the basis of PatternBuilder. So we couldn't really hope for a better person on this webinar. And then we have Daniel Solomon, who is portfolio lead for client collaboration at Lewis Silkin. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Caroline. Really looking forward to this.
Thanks for interrupting you straight away. It's great to have you here. So you've been at Lewis Silkin for 3.5 years, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And what does your role entail? Just tell everyone, whilst we've still got a few more people joining, tell everyone what your role involves.
Yeah, of course. So I look after client-facing technology, essentially. So that's anything from client collaboration portals, so things like IQ, all the way through to document automation, generative AI, and building out solutions that we can use on client work. And as a firm, we're a mid-sized city law firm. We've got a very large employment practice. And we also do a lot of work within the creative industries space across other, we call them LPGs, legal practice groups, but corporate, commercial, IP, real estate, and probably a few others that I have not mentioned, data as well.
Okay, great. No, great. It's so great. I know Scott will agree with me. It's so great we do a lot of product focused webinars, and it's really great to have you on as a client and talk about your user experience. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for saying hi in the chat. It's going to be interactive. If you're listening live, then please ask questions as we go. We're going to, in terms of sort of the running order, so how this is going to go. So Daniel's going to talk about Lewis Silkin's journey in selecting and using PatternBuilder and then PatternBuilder Max, before Scott's going to do a demonstration of PatternBuilder Max, which I know you're going to really enjoy. Daniel's going to talk us through some of the work that Lewis Silkin is doing with PatternBuilder Max, which is great to bring those use cases to life. And then we're going to come on to talk more generally about generative AI and how to identify use cases and how to achieve adoption, which I'm really looking forward to. And obviously at that point, it might make sense at that point for everybody to start really asking questions. Certainly at the beginning, the focus is going to be very much on the work that NetDocs and Lewis Silkin are doing, which I'm looking forward to running through with you. I'm sure that most people joining this call know something about PatternBuilder, but just in case you're just, completely fresh, before I hand over to Daniel. So as I mentioned, so NetDocuments acquired Afterpattern. Then in 2022, they released PatternBuilder, which is a no-code document and workflow automation tool. It's built directly into the NetDocuments DMS platform, and you can use it to automate NDAs, sales contracts, other agreements. You don't need me to talk this. We're going to come on to that in some detail. And then it was in October last year that NetDocuments announced at its annual user conference the general availability of PatternBuilder Max, which includes, at the time it was 9 out-of-the-box apps that incorporate Gen AI, and we're going to be talking you through that in some detail. So Daniel, let's talk about, before we even dive into NetDocs DMS PatternBuilder, talk about your journey in terms of, I know you describe it as you're in your third wave of automation. What does that mean?
Yeah, of course. So the first wave was very much kind of the more simple automation, so automating very small parts of a letter, so address, name, etc., etc. So that's been around for years. That was around before I joined the firm. And then we moved into kind of the second wave, which was thinking about how could we leverage document automation in a way that could help automate some more complex legal documents. And so I was looking at more standalone solutions that we could upload our documents to and build out these automations, and then also give our clients access to those. So that was a project that I was very much involved with, and we kind of invested in a product. And then when NetDocuments came to us saying they were launching a document automation solution, my initial view, I was actually quite skeptical. We had that tool, we'd put a lot of effort into it. We had spent a long time automating a number of our contracts. But when I saw PatternBuilder for the first time, I actually realized that it would launch a kind of third wave. And that was a solution that was really embedded with our DMS. It was something that allowed us to do a lot more. And what really blew me away was actually the vision. And I could really see where this was going. And actually, this was even before we had the big announcement of ChatGPT that I think blew everyone away. Was that November 22 that all kicked off?
When life changed.
So really, my main skepticism about moving from that wave 2 to 3 was, is the juice really worth the squeeze here? Will our existing solution be able to do actually what the NetDoc solution is doing? And so in that initial meeting with Scott, really myself and the others just thought, wow, this is awesome. And that persuaded us to kind of make that jump from wave 2 to wave 3, if you like.
Okay. And it was very much because it's part of your DMS. I mean, just and sort of an integrated. I mean, lots of different reasons. Okay, fine. What were the particular? Are you able to say in terms? I really like that expression. Is the juice worth the squeeze? So clearly it was. What was the particular? What could it do that your previous solution couldn't do?
So the first thing it could do was quite complex calculations. So we have a big employment law practice, and some of what we do involves calculating settlement payments, and that's a fairly complex calculation. And so with our previous tool, while it was great, what we weren't able to do is we had to kind of specify what that termination payment was. With PatternBuilder, actually what we can do is we can input all of the inputs into that calculation, and the PatternBuilder application will do that calculation for you. So it provided that next layer really of complexity. Also around styling, it fully incorporated our house style, and that was really important to us and our lawyers. The other solution, it was able to replicate it to an extent, but it never got it kind of exactly perfect for what we were looking for. The third piece was around the kind of full integration with our document management system. Obviously, it being NetDocs, it came fully integrated initially. So what we could do is we could have people completing a automation form and the output just saved directly into NetDocs. And that's a very marginal gain. But if you're saving 20 seconds saving time over 100 documents, actually that's quite a lot of time that you're saving just from pure admin. And then the third piece was around the vision and some of the features that we saw coming. It was things around the bulk upload. It was the commitments the NetDocs were giving us as well around time with Scott to really kind of make sure that we knew how to use the tool, that we could feed in some of our suggestions, and that those suggestions would be at the very least looked at. And so we just felt that that package meant that we were willing to take the hit on re-automating some of the stuff that we'd already done.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned that they've also, I know this is a perhaps comparatively small point, but they've got sort of best practice video libraries. They make it and how-to guides, and they make it, you know, much easier for you to sort of learn, or perhaps for learners to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've started with my team doing a lot of the automation, but actually we found that some of our fee earners are quite interested in it. And so we've been upskilling some of our fee earners as well.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And then so, and that's obviously PatternBuilder itself. And then, so tell me, before we come on to Scott's demo, about when you started using PatternBuilder Max.
Yep, of course. So we had that kind of big ground shattering day in November 22 where ChatGPT was introduced. And so I was challenged by our CTO and my manager to think about how we can introduce generative AI into the way that we're doing things. And that was quite a long process, because at the very outset there were vendors that came in and said, we're introducing generative AI. And so it was trying to find out which vendors had that defensibility and weren't going to get overtaken, but B, were doing something that could really affect the legal industry, the legal landscape. And so when NetDocs came to us, I can't remember exactly when it was, telling us that they were launching PatternBuilder Max, and this is what it was able to do. Actually, we got really excited. And because of the value and the return on investment that we had from PatternBuilder, it was really a no-brainer to begin a pilot with PatternBuilder Max when it was available. As we all know, I think the legal industry's buying cycle can be quite long. Actually, we didn't find that with PatternBuilder Max, because we were kind of so eager to get that demo going. It just made sense to do it. And so once it was launched, we kind of spent some time with Scott understanding the basics of it. And actually we found, and this is where the title of this webinar is so pertinent, what we found is it's a bit like chess. So it's very easy to learn, and actually it's a lot easier than regular document automation. It's very easy to learn how to incorporate some of the generative bits into our automations and into our building generative applications. But it's quite complex, and there's so much that you can do with it and so many different moves that you can make to make it more efficient, that it's really interesting and really exciting. And it does take some time to master it, but in the time that it takes for you to master it, you can get some really good value adds on the way.
Really interesting. So so just for people who weren't here right at the beginning, so Scott's going to do a demo of PatternBuilder Max, then we're going to come back to Daniel to talk through some of the use cases, and then we're going to talk more in the round about generative AI adoption and ROI. If you would like, please feel free, as Scott does his demo and Daniel does his talks through some screenshots, please do feel free to put any questions in the chat. I may not interrupt them at that very moment, just but please do feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go, and we'll definitely come to those. So Scott, would you like to, the demo will be about 10-12 minutes, so feel free to ask questions during that time, and Scott, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. Really excited to be here today, and it's great to be with Lewis Silkin, and kind of a part of their journey as they've incorporated this technology. Just building on one of the things Daniel was saying, I think one of the things that's been very surprising as we've rolled this out, and it's been our most successful sort of product launch of all time by a factor of about 10. But one of the most exciting things about it is how fast the time to value is with generative AI versus a traditional automation tool. Traditional automation tool, for those who have spent some time in the salt mines of those tools, just automating a 20-page document can require a tremendous amount of effort, because you have to specify, if this, then that, insert this clause, but under this condition and insert this other clause. And it's very rules based. And so you have to know every rule and how it all cascades. I think what's so amazing about generative AI, and especially when built into a workflow tool like PatternBuilder Max, is you go from rules to rules of thumb, right? You don't have to quite specify every last angle and every last piece of logic. You can explain it as if you would to a human, and often get some really, really powerful results. So that's what I'm hoping to share with you all today, and let's get to it. So, all right, so I'll start with a few slides because what's a demo without a few slides at the beginning? Just, you know, from the very beginning, you know, we talked to a lot of our customers like Lewis Silkin, as they were embarking on this journey with generative AI. And I think from the very beginning, most folks were very convinced that it was going to move the needle at their firms, but it was a matter of how do you incorporate it, how do you deploy it, how do you do it responsibly. And I think one thing that became very apparent to most folks who were playing around with a tool like ChatGPT, for example, is that most of us, lawyers, legal professionals, paralegals, whomever, are not prompt engineers, right? To give an example, this is one of the, you know, actually this comes from our chief product officer, Dan. He was messing around with ChatGPT, and he pasted in part of a document. It was a bankruptcy matter document. And it started at Article 6. So it didn't have the rest of the document. It was just an excerpt. And he said, draft a table of contents for the agreement above. And what he got was a lovely table of contents referencing non-existent pieces of the document that he had pasted in. So he had only pasted in Article 6, but it was giving him Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. And technically, it was fulfilling his instructions, which was draft a table of contents for the agreement above. It was just filling in those gaps. But what he found is that when he modified the prompt, create a partial table of contents based only on the text above, right? Suddenly he got exactly the output he wanted. He got only the table of contents for the text that had been pasted into ChatGPT. Now, this is a really small nuance, but it made all the difference between a hallucination and a really, really helpful outcome. And that's something that we realized really early on with this tool, which is that putting it into the hands of every one of your end users to have to craft prompts and engineer them and word them in just the right way so that they get the results they want is a recipe for, we think, disaster. And so how do you have a technology that, on the one hand, allows a firm to leverage the incredible flexibility of generative AI to run at their various use cases, but at the same time gives that firm the control to test, vet, and thoughtfully deploy only those automations that make sense. And that's where we sort of arrived at, you know, PatternBuilder Max. And the idea with PatternBuilder Max is that generative AI is only part of the puzzle, right? You might use generative AI, for example, to extract some entities from a document, but then you need to save those into a database. And then you need to use those entities to then populate a document. It's a true end-to-end workflow. It's not just a chat experience. It's something that you need to be able to design, test, and deploy. And that's been our approach. And what we found is that when firms do this, when they're able to test against specific use cases and only deploy those use cases and essentially reduce the prompt engineering to just a simple button push by their end users, then what they get is tremendous scale in a way that chatbots, if you had to have a chat every time you want to get something done, it's just not possible. So this is just an example from a user, but you know, they built a automation on PatternBuilder Max, and it was basically just 2 users at the firm who were running this. But they quickly saw that over the course of 5 weeks, they had scaled from running just a few, prompts per session, all the way up to about 600. And we saw that kind of with the token usage as well. And if you kind of do the math on it, basically this one customer with these 2 users ran apps that kind of read and outputted about 30,000 pages. And so this kind of scale isn't really possible with a chat interface. It's only possible, we think, with true workflow automation that incorporates generative AI. And that's what I'm going to show you right now. Okay, so I'm just popping over to NetDocuments. And, this is my apps tab where I can see automations that I built. If I was in a workspace, I could see automations that were particular to that workspace or the type of work I was doing. And I'm just going to run through a few examples of these to give folks, on this webinar, a sense of what you can build with PatternBuilder Max. But I want to emphasize that these are just examples. You could build 1,000 different use cases if you want to, that are tailored to your particular area of law or your particular use case. And we see this every day with our customers, and that's what Daniel will be talking about in a moment. But as Caroline mentioned, when someone begins with PatternBuilder Max, they actually out of the gate, they have 9 sort of studio apps that we provide them with, and these are meant to sort of cover the most generic use cases. So imagine like summarization. So we built a summary app that you can run and you can use to very quickly summarize any documents you want. Now, if you've been exploring different generative AI tools, you'll probably find that a lot of them, this is kind of the classic use case at this point, right? I select a document. In this case, it's directly in NetDocuments. So I can go ahead and just search, find the deposition that I want to summarize, for example, and then go ahead and indicate kind of the length of the summary that I want, as well as, and I think this is really important, the doc type. So right off the bat, I think folks who have explored summarization use cases will find that they actually need slightly different summaries depending on the document type. If it's a deposition, you'll want something. If it's a medical record or a lease, you'll want a different type of summary. But the ability to actually go into this tool, which I'll show you in a moment, and actually change the prompt and add new doc types is really powerful. So you can make sure that you're getting the kind of summary you want every time. And at this point, we can just hit go and give it about a minute to run. And so while it's actually running, I'm going to show you the underlying document so you can get a sense of what's being summarized. So we pop back over here, and I'm just going to go ahead and search for that document that's being summarized and open that up so you can just get a quick peek at that. So here we go. This is the document that's actually being summarized. It's Addie Thweet versus Prince George County School. And if you scroll down, you can see it's a deposition of Lisa Pennicott, who's the superintendent at the school and had to make an employment decision to let go of someone, one of the bus drivers for the school. So that's kind of the basic document. And usually with, these processes, they can take about 1 to 2 minutes. But then what do you get at the end? Well, you get a lovely summary that actually goes through each section of the document and summarizes it for you in the way you want. And you'll notice, because this is a deposition, we've pulled out things that we care about, like deponent name, deposition date, case name, case number. And you don't have to bounce between different systems because this is embedded in the DM. It's actually saved directly back into NetDocuments with the metadata you want in the workspace you want. So that's one example. And I think that the crucial point here is that because it is a no-code tool that this is built on, you're not stuck with how we built this sort of app. You could actually go under the hood of the tool, and you can actually make changes to how it's built. Now, this is something that at a firm like, for example, like Lewis Silkin, that you'll have dedicated folks like Daniel who will actually be the ones who can who learn the tool and make those modifications. It won't be every user, but it is surprising how quickly folks can come up to speed and really start to lean into that prompt engineering skill set. And the kind of results you can see. So I'm actually going into the application that we were just looking at, and you'll see that everything you saw there is completely configurable. So like if I wanted to add a new question type to that first screen that we saw, where we were picking document type and summary length and whether you search NetDocuments, you can do that. And if you wanted to actually design the prompt in a different way, well, you can change those instructions if you want. You can change which models you're using. We let you select the right model for the right time. You can configure things like user message, system message. We won't go into all these details, but it can seem like a lot at first, but I would say after an hour or two of learning, most innovation folks, people who have had experience with tools like workflow automation tools, can very quickly start to get value with just some simple learning around things like temperature, maximum length, and the structuring prompts. And that's something that Daniel will go into in more detail very soon. Now, I want to go through one or two more examples, and then kind of hand things back to Daniel. So that was a what we call a studio app. So that's an out-of-the-box app that you kind of get on day one. But one of the things that we've seen as this is rolled out to large law firms and large corporations all across the world is that where they get the most value is actually out of those really, really customized use cases that are specific to a workflow at their firm, right? And I think what's unique about PatternBuilder Max is you can build those custom generative AI workflows in a matter of 30 minutes, 40 minutes if you want to. So here's a bit of a stylized example, but I think one that is nonetheless pretty interesting. So let's say you're a firm that your common workflow is that you draft demand letters. And the way you draft these demand letters is you'll have a paralegal at your firm actually do an intake where they write down notes about the demand letter that's going to be written on behalf of the client. They then file those intake notes into the DM. And then you, as the attorney who's going to be drafting that demand letter, have to review those notes. You have to prepare the demand letter. Maybe you have to look at some of your prior precedent, times you've drafted similar types of demand letter, and then draft a net new demand letter based on the individualized facts of the case, as well as those precedent documents. Well, you can automate that entire process with PatternBuilder Max. So let's start with the intake notes. So instead of you having to actually go through those intake notes and pull out all the relevant entities, you can actually just run an extraction using generative AI, and it's going to pull out all the relevant pieces of information that you care about. So who's your client? Who's the counterparty in this? What is the nature of the demand letter that they're asking to be written? Where did it happen? So what jurisdiction are we talking about? When was the request made? These are all entities that you would normally have to sift through the notes of those intake notes, but now it's all been pulled out automatically. So you see client, counterparty, type of infringement. These have all been pulled out of those intake notes and automatically filled in here. And I can say, as someone who's run this many, many times, this is all accurate. This is actually what's in the intake notes. And I'm showing you it for pre-filling this form, but if you want to do things like automatically apply metadata to your documents, which I think for many KM professionals is sort of like the holy grail of KM, you can actually do that with this tool today, which is pretty incredible. So just to complete the story here, I've got this demand letter. I pulled out all the information I want. I now want to select a precedent demand letter from within the DM. So I remember I was working on this trademark case for Acme Co. And so I'm going to go ahead and say, you know what, I want to use this template, but this is a copyright matter. So what I'm going to hope is that generative AI is going to adapt that precedent document that I'm pointing to, make it about copyright, and also make it about these specific facts. And I'm the responsible attorney, so let's go ahead and fill in my information right here, and let's go ahead and hit go. Now, this is a true generative AI workflow. This isn't just me going to ChatGPT and saying, draft me a demand letter. This is actually building a generative AI workflow around a process that already exists at my firm, taking those intake notes, automatically extracting data from it, then taking that to pre-fill a form, which I then review, I hit go, and using a precedent document to then draft a net new demand letter. Again, a bit of a stylized example, but we're seeing use cases like this deployed all the time at law firms and corporations all across the world. And I think it's a really exciting time because the use cases really are kind of unending. I think with traditional document automation, you had to sort of say, oh, what are the very high volume, very rules-based documents that we're doing? And those are the things that we can actually automate. But with generative AI, you can reach into document drafting use cases or document extraction use cases that really weren't possible before. So let's actually take a look at this document that we just drafted. And again, it's saved right back into the DM where we want it to be. And sure enough, it includes all that information that we wanted. It's about copyright, but it's actually using that precedent. And the precedent had like a 5-point enumeration in it. And here we see the 5-point enumeration right here. It's about the jurisdiction we want. It's a really incredible output. So I have one more use case I want to go through, and then I think I would love to just dig a little bit deeper into Daniel's work with Lewis Silkin. So these are, at NetDocuments, we believe in sort of meeting users where they are. So I've shown you running these automations from the web application directly from within the DM. But honestly, most of our users are working in Microsoft Word. They want to be able to run these automations from Word. And so any app that you build on with Pattern Builder, you can actually make that available directly within Microsoft Word. So here this is a very common use case, non-disclosure agreement. I need to, I got it from my client. They want to know if they can sign it. So we need to apply our playbook to it, right? We need to actually say, what are the terms here? Do we need to negotiate some of these terms? And there are a lot of generative AI tools out there that this is the single thing they do. They apply a playbook automatically to an agreement. Well, the power of PatternBuilder Max is I literally built this in 30 minutes using PatternBuilder Max. It was something that I could just say, you know what, this is a pretty cool use case. Let's do it. And so we now have an automatic contract playbook tool. You can select the text of the document you want to apply your playbook to. You can select the app you want to run by clicking, continue. You can then go ahead and indicate who you're negotiating on behalf of. So in this case, we're actually doing it for Acme Co. And then you can select from among your playbooks, right? And in this case, we have a non-disclosure agreement playbook. We're going to pull in automatically all the our playbook policies. If we click into these, we can see what some of these are. So for example, duration of confidentiality, we go for indefinite, but our fallback is a period of 10 years. So let's say we just want to apply this entire playbook if we want to. Let's go ahead and hit continue. And what we'll see is that, based on the instructions we provide on the back end for how we want this to output, we're going to get a nice summary of any potential issues with this non-disclosure agreement, as well as any areas where actually we're okay because the language of the agreement aligns with what we want. And again, what's so powerful about this is this was a use case where we had the idea for it in one day, and then in that same day we were able to use PatternBuilder Max to build this out. And we're seeing that with firms where they'll have an idea and literally within the same day already have a prototype incorporating generative AI around a particular use case because it's such a flexible tool. So here's our output right here. I won't go through all these, but for example, we were talking about duration of confidentiality. It's flagged that there is a change required because it says 1 year, which is exactly right. It says 1 year, which is shorter than our standard language of indefinite. So it's properly flagged that we need to make that change. And so, these are just a couple of use cases. We see thousands of different use cases being built all the time. But we think this is, a really exciting capability because again, it puts generative AI into your workflows. It puts generative AI into your hands, but allows you to control it and responsibly deploy it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Scott. I'm going to ask there's some generic questions which I'll come back to after Daniel, but just because these are quite specific and we might forget, because we've just seen your demo. So a couple of people wanted to know, must the intake notes you mentioned be made up in a strict structure or can they be freehand? And then a couple of people wanted to know that. If you could just cover that before we go on to Daniel, and then there's just one more question.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, maybe it makes sense to just show you what those intake notes were. I didn't actually have a chance to do that, but those were completely freehand. So that it was literally just some notes that the paralegal had scribbled down about the case, just a couple paragraphs. And what PatternBuilder Max allows you to do is it allows you to do entity extraction. So you can pull out very specific structured data and you can put that wherever you want. You can put it into a database, you can put it into a document. You can, in the case that you saw, you can actually use it to pre-fill a form. It's totally up to you and how you want to design your workflow. But yeah, you can see all that information. We wanted the Paragon Pies Corporation. They discovered that Best Bakers Enterprises in Texas was infringing their copyright. And here's the date of the request. All that information was automatically pulled out. from this totally unstructured data.
Okay. And then can we, someone said, can we simply be in NetDocuments, select a document from, say, our recent docs and launch an AI workflow?
That's essentially the heart of the matter. We don't currently support launching it directly from your recent documents, but you can certainly select a recent document and launch a generative AI workflow around that, whether it's extracting data from it, summarizing it, using it to draft a net new document. It's really up to you.
Okay, great. And there's, thanks for your questions. I'm going to come back to them, but I think it would be great. They're more generic. So I think if we could come to Daniel and talk through your use cases, and then I'll come back to, and just keep posting questions by all means, please.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that,
Thanks.
Caroline, and thanks, Scott. So there's been a number of different use cases that we've built out using PatternBuilder Max. There are some where, like with the Employment Tribunal Chronology Builder that I'll talk through in a second, that we're okay to kind of show you on this call. There are others that I'll talk through the use case, but because they're quite commercially sensitive, I couldn't get the screenshots of them. But just to talk through one of the apps that we've created. So the problem was, for a lot of our employment tribunal works, we get a load of different documents, and those documents might contain some conflicting information. We want to understand what the heads of claim are, and we just want to understand what's happened. And so we already had built a chronology app, but what we wanted to do was we wanted to build an application that would be able to ingest a number of different documents and then produce a chronology for each, smush those chronologies together, and identify where there were discrepancies. And so we built out the Employment Tribunal Chronology Builder long term. So once we've got this initial use case perfect, we'll look to then populate a document like how Scott showed in his demo. But what was really important about this is that actually it speaks to one of the learnings that we've made along the way, which is the importance of chain prompting. And so you can have one chain, for example, in this use case, you can have one chain that pulled out the chronologies from the documents that you upload. And then you can have a second prompt that puts all of those chronologies into one and then does the extraction of the grounds of claim and does all of the looking for the conflicting events. And so what that means is that you're not doing one really long, really complex, really confusing prompt. Actually, you're breaking it down to much more bite-sized pieces. And that's, I think, actually one of the questions in the chat was about some of the constructive feedback that we've gotten. And that's some feedback that we got from one app that we had produced, which was essentially, we receive an investigation report from our clients. Our app will then read that investigation report. It will extract key information, and then it will produce a cease and desist letter. And so the ability to chain prompts and the need to chain prompts and break things down into little bits came from that first attempt at that use case, because the first attempt, while it was completely accurate and it was pulling out things that were in that document, in that source document, it wasn't quite getting it in the right place and it wasn't quite getting it in the right format. So we took that to Scott and we said, Scott, how can we do this? How can we get things in the right place? And so Scott showed us that kind of chaining piece, and that's been so helpful in making sure that we're getting the right information, we're being really targeted in getting it into the right place. In terms of this tribunal chronology builder, so where we are now is we've released it to a very, very tight group. They're running a few tests on it. The initial feedback's been very positive. And so once we've got their feedback, we'll look to run it through the other people. But actually, one thing that's quite interesting with this one is this is a really good example of what Scott was talking about earlier about the rule of thumb piece. And when I was showing Scott this application yesterday, actually he had some constructive feedback himself as to how I could make the prompting even better. And so that's some feedback that I'll look to incorporate into this app. So even though this works, it can be improved by making those small tweaks, and those sorts of marginal gains are really important with some of the apps that we've been building. Scott, if you move over to the next slide. The other one, and this is an example of someone came to me and said, I actually don't even think they came to me. I think it was just a casual conversation with someone. And they said, isn't it really annoying when you've got a really long email chain and you just want to understand what's been said? So very quickly, I thought, that sounds like a really good use case for PatternBuilder. So in about 15 minutes, I built out an email summarizer application. That's now gone live, but it's really good. All you need to do is just copy the body of an email, paste it into PatternBuilder Max, and it will just produce you a very short summary of what's been said. And you can see, this was, I think, 6 or 7 different emails, and it's just condensed it into just something very clear, very concise. So it's absolutely fantastic in that regard. And Scott, I think that was
me. Sorry,
yeah.
I was trying to find my
Sorry.
mute on. Do you know what? Someone had a question which I'd like to come back to on that point. They said, it's quite relevant to what you were just saying, perhaps. So how would you contend that this app is better than a more generic AI app such as Copilot, which obviously has got those sorts of summarization capability? I guess that's an either or both of you.
So for me, Copilot's awesome, but where PatternBuilder Max really comes into its own is taking that initial document that you chuck into Copilot, and then we would be the ones that kind of give it the examples and give it embeddings and say, this is what we want to pull out. So we can be a lot more controlled from our app builder perspective so that the end result is what we're looking for. Whereas Copilot, although fantastic, for me, it serves a different purpose. It's a bit more generic, if you like, whereas this is more about the kind of workflow side of things. Scott, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you said it the exact right way, which is the way to think about PatternBuilder Max is it's workflow. It's not kind of the more generic kind of general purpose business applications that Copilot offers. We view Copilot as a great complement to PatternBuilder. I mean, you can certainly, for example, email summarization or like maybe summarizing a document. There's some overlap in terms of use case, but a really bespoke workflow for building out a demand letter based on your prior precedents that extracts from your intake notes and then saves that to a database so you can be reused when you have to prepare the next document. That's something that Copilot is just never going to be in the business of doing. But it's something that if you're trying to deliver legal work at scale is really important when you're thinking about a generative AI tool. And so I think that's really where we've seen the difference is, Copilot's great if you want to do a one-off use case and chat about it. But a lot of the things that we see our customers wanting to do, for example, drop documents into a folder and just have entities extracted from them, drop documents in a folder and have entities extracted from them, and then automatically draft a responsive pleading or something like that. There's no chatting, there's no anything you want to do. You just kind of want that easy button to get it done. And that's where you need to use a true workflow tool.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Sorry, the trouble with coming back to questions is that I then have to go back to find the question. Sorry, we've got quite a few. So when choosing models, do we need a GPT subscription?
No, that's one of the great things about PatternBuilder Max is we essentially have done all the hard work of working with Microsoft to make sure not only are we leveraging the best and greatest models, but we're doing it in a really thoughtful and responsible way. So if you have a particular region, if you're in a particular region, like the UK, we have a UK deployment, we have an EU deployment, we have an APAC deployment. And for each of those, we've worked with Microsoft to get special exemptions from their normal kind of data practices, which would expose confidential information to Microsoft employees. We realized that that was a total non-starter for the legal industry. And so we have actually special exemptions in place on behalf of our customers that make sure that no input or output data is ever reviewed by Microsoft, ever scanned by Microsoft. It's purely used for the purpose of producing outputs and helping you do your best work.
Okay. And then, so would it be possible? But everyone just jump in. It's great to have lots of questions. Is there, I think this is is there a place where we can, I mean, maybe this isn't after the webinar in light of time, actually, is there a place where we can see what use cases are being considered and built by other firms? Is that, and appreciate confidentiality, but wondering if there's like a community, maybe we can deal with that after the webinar. I don't know if you want to say anything briefly on that.
I would say that we do have what we call ND Studio content, where we're kind of publishing how-tos on different use cases. We're trying to have, webinars like this where some of our customers actually do share their use cases. But I think, yeah, we like the cool thing about PatternBuilder Max is it's a community of builders. I mean, folks who are learning how to incorporate generative AI. It's not just a solution. So there's a lot that we can learn from each other as we all go on this journey together.
Yeah, we're actually launching something that might help with that. So I will drop you a line on that as well. Do you think we need a particular role in the firm to manage, configure PatternBuilder, or the idea is that it's being used directly by the practice groups? How much is IT required to be involved?
So at Lewis Silkin, I sit within the IT team. I do have a legal background though, so I kind of, I've taken up the mantle of owning PatternBuilder essentially in PatternBuilder Max. I think for me, it was fairly straightforward to learn it, and it really depends on how your firm's structured and your way of doing things. But I do genuinely believe that it is very, it's possible for fee earners to pick up themselves and build their own applications. Just obviously but what's really important there is just making sure you've got that governance in place, and that you've got that kind of, this is how we do things at our firm.
Yeah. And then there's a question. So I think this might be another question, Daniel. So would it be possible to just input a load of emails or other written communication and ask PatternBuilder to make logical sense of it, i.e. summarize who said what on what topic and reactions to that?
I'd be confident that it could do that. It would essentially be a mix of those two applications that I talked through. So the chronology application, where you upload 5 documents. So in this case, you could upload 5 email chains, and the email chain summarizer, where it kind of pulled out who said what in that email chain. So yeah, I'd be fairly confident that with a bit of tailoring, you could definitely meet that use case.
I think I've got everybody's questions. There was one ahead of the chat. Perhaps you could repost that actually, so that we've got it at the bottom, and I can ask that, because we've got 9 minutes to cover a lot. But please keep your questions coming. It's always, to be honest with you, better to have your questions rather. But so in sort of general terms, I mean, we haven't got an awful lot of time, but I don't know if you want to talk about, so we still really have got to talk about more generally, identifying use cases for Gen AI, but we were also going to talk about how you arrive at the decision to use these solutions for client work, which is really important. And we haven't really touched on adoption. I think we need another webinar. We're always a bit over ambitious, but so I'm going to ask you both to talk about some of those in the round. So because in light of time, really, so talk about, from your perspective, Daniel, perhaps, what the best way is to identify the use cases, and also how you decided that you could use them for client work.
Yeah, so in terms of how we decided we could use it for client work, that's quite an easy one. So the very first thing to do is get the fee earners comfortable with it and start using it for internal work. And then once you've started using it for internal work, what we've started now doing is we're now using it our lawyers are now using it for client work. And then the third phase, once kind of that's fully, everyone's comfortable with that, is to get people comfortable saying to a client, right, we've automated and we've created this for you. You can use it. So we're very much at the moment in that second phase where we're using generative AI and we're using document automation to support our client work. In terms of, but really it's the snowball effect. So once you kind of start building that snowball, what we've certainly found is that it's kind of, what one person talks about it to someone else, then that person talks about it to someone else, and you get more and more work.
Okay. Did you have to engage directly with clients in order to sort of, so you have to sort of say, are you comfortable with this? It's quite, for another conversation to go into depth on that, but there's quite a mixed, variety of views out there. So do you sort of engage with some, and then
we tell them that we'll be using generative AI on their work. We do have some clients that actively ask us, are you using generative AI? What are you using it for? Because they want to know that, because they want to understand, how can we offer them more for less, essentially. In terms of how we get people on board, really, it's something that we're always working on, and identifying those use cases is something that we're still working on. The most challenging piece is that it's not just a case of saying, right, here's the product, this is what it does, X, Y, Z, and there you go. It's a case of thinking, here's what we've built. These are some of the, initial use cases. What's the art of the possible? What are the problems that you face that we can build something to fix for you? And actually, the NetDoc Studio apps is a really good starting point for that. Quite often, people have come to us with really elaborate use cases, and we've just said to them, well, why don't you just try it with the Studio app? So NetDocs have produced one called Continue Draft, which is a bit like a drafting assistant. So you can ask it things like, make this more buyer-friendly or tone this down a bit. And so one of our fee earners came to us. They produce a quarterly report for a load of our clients, and it's all non-chargeable. And a ridiculous amount of time was spent producing that report, because they had to curate information from our international partner firms, condense it, put it all into one format. And actually, when we looked at the problem, we thought, what we can do with the Continue Draft app, we can give you a prompt. We can be really tailored with that prompt that you put into the app, and then you can put in the update, and it would produce that. And so it's kind of just showing people, and then thinking logically as to how can you resolve that. And since we've done that, actually, it's saved, I think, something like 32%, which is pretty impressive. The other thing is, it's kind of, and this is my way of identifying use cases. I like to talk to people, and we kind of demo in our practice groups and whatnot. But I find that always the most successful approach is just to talk to people in casual conversations, build a best friend within a practice group, and find that best friend, and then they'll champion your cause, and they'll kind of be the one that tries it out for the first time. They get a load of plaudits, so other people in the practice group want to try it, and that's really how we're building that snowball, even more so than demoing, to be honest with you.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It sounds so simple, but that's something that people often struggle with, especially with remote working. You said, is there sort of very briefly, like a specific way that talking works? I know that sounds ridiculous, but is there a way? Is it just literally just making yourself available, or people, your mole, or your best friend making themselves available?
It's both. It's making myself available. It's also spotting the opportunity, and when you're having a conversation with someone about something else, just tying it in. So just kind of finding some way of saying, oh, have you seen this email summarization app that we've created? Have you seen what we can do with this kind of employment tribunal chronology piece? And then actually quite often you'll find oh, hang on, I wonder if we can do something similar for this use case. And so it's working working with those individuals and building up those relationships that I think is so important.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. Scott, is NetDocs providing training sessions on the new features? Someone wants to know.
Yeah. So we essentially, anytime someone purchases PatternBuilder or PatternBuilder Max, we provide onboarding support to help them sort of get started and learning the tool, using the Studio apps, and then maybe taking their first steps beyond that and building out their own custom workflows. We're calling these sort of like workshops, and increasingly we're finding that the most powerful results, the most ROI is actually in those very custom apps that only that particular firm or corporation can really think of and imagine, because it's so specific to their use case. So we believe onboarding is a big part of the picture to help people get to that customized app.
And then just to wrap up, so you've obviously been dealing with a lot of firms. So do you think, I know you've said before that firms struggle with the art of the possible, and that people don't know what you can automate. So is it best people should, I think you said people shouldn't start with asking what Gen AI can do for them, but what's your recommendation in the last sort of minute or so in terms of how they should start then?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if you do start with, how do you want to use Gen AI, for this department or that department, you'll get a lot of blank stares, because honestly, it's moving so fast that a lot of folks don't even know what's possible today. And so what we found instead is have someone internally that really understands what is possible, and then have that person along with maybe someone else kind of go and just say, hey, can you just describe a really high value process, that you do to generate fees at our firm? Let's just walk through that workflow. And so you explore a couple of those workflows, you map them out, and then that person who really understands what's possible can, circle those moments in the workflow. Well, we can use extraction for that. We can use an auto generation feature for that. And they can start to identify those areas in the workflow where they can move the needle. We actually have an app that people can use to do that kind of process. So it asks a series of questions about, your specific practice area. And then at the end, it provides some tailored recommendations using, of course, generative AI to get those results for you. So it's, it's all a full circle now. So
perfect note to end on. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you to everybody listening, and thanks for some great questions. If I have not answered a question, please do contact one of us. You can contact newsroom@legaltechnology.com as just a starting point, and then I can direct that to Scott or Daniel or whoever. I apologize if I have forgotten any of your questions, but it's great to have some engagement. Thank you so much, really appreciate it. And people were asking if this is recorded. To people listening live, yes it is. To people listening to the recording, so thank you very much. Thank you all so much for joining. Daniel and Scott, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye everyone.